Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. In what might as well become a series at this point, we once again find ourselves having to ask what the hell is going on. This time though, the drama isn't some primary election caucus or weird oil economics, it's the US Postal Service. Which isn't usually something one expects to become a political flashpoint, but whatever. I guess for 2020 standards, the battle over the post office is pretty normal, so let's get into it. Before we do, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. While the main controversy has taken place over the past couple of weeks, there's actually been bits and pieces of postal drama spilling out of Congress for years now. So let's go back a few years. The best place to start here is probably 2006, the year in which the Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act was passed. This act has largely been cited as one of the main problems facing the USPS, and not without reason. The feature of the bill that we care about here was the section that required the Postal Service to pre-fund 75 years of health benefits for the service's retirees. This put an enormous financial burden on the already pressed-for-money Postal Service, so much so that in 2019, the Institute for Policy Studies found that if this feature of the bill were not in place, the USPS would have turned a profit for each of the past 6 years. Now, we'll get back to this bill in a moment, but right now, we have to take a quick detour into a niche debate over the business model of the US Postal Service. It's less tedious than it sounds, I promise. For ages now, there's been an ongoing debate in Congress over how much money the USPS should be making. Some argue it's too difficult to keep afloat and that it would be better to just privatise everything, while others argue that it shouldn't matter if the post office is profitable and that it's important enough that Congress should give it money anyway. And in the current debate that's brought these tensions to the surface, a lot of the facts about how the USPS is supposed to run have been left in the dust. The post office basically runs in the middle of the two aforementioned arguments. While no, it's not inherently profitable and rarely seeks to be so, it's also not inherently a burden on the taxpayer. In fact, the Postal Service is designed so that it doesn't cost the American taxpayer anything. It's meant to break even. However, this has become increasingly difficult in recent years, leading to an increase in the arguments that the USPS needs to be drastically restructured. And this is actually one of the key policies of current Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. More on him in a moment. But now we've got that debate out of the way, we can get back to the 2006 bill. As we mentioned a moment ago, it's largely that bill that has contributed to the financial struggles of the modern post office. This, however, was never intended to happen. The bill was meant to balance itself, and even according to a Congressional Budget Office report from 2006, the bill was supposed to help the Postal Service turn a profit. It sought to achieve this by transferring the responsibility of paying pensions to employees with military service from the Postal Service to the Treasury Department, and by doing so, alleviate another significant financial struggle. This, however, did not play out in the way that Congress hoped it would. As such, a huge strain was placed on the Postal Service that wouldn't be put on any private company, and as such, the Postal Service continued to lose money, and the current pandemic only accelerated the process, as the service has struggled to maintain a safe work environment. All of which brings us back to Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. In May of this year, the logistics company CEO and major Republican fundraiser was appointed by the USPS Board of Governors to the position of Postmaster General, and when he assumed office, DeJoy quickly began planning a series of measures meant to guide the USPS to a more business-like style of operation. Many of these changes were widely unpopular, as things like decreases in overtime and mass rescheduling left otherwise ready-for-delivery mail sat in post offices for far longer than it would otherwise be, causing countless delays. And this is where we get to the heart of the current USPS debate, the election. Given the unprecedented number of Americans that will be voting by mail this November, there's been a significant degree of concern among many that the post office may be unable to keep up with the massive influx of ballots, and the drama around DeJoy's recent changes have only escalated things. And honestly, yeah, there's a reason for concern surrounding how the election is going to work, but not for the reason that pundits are tweeting about. By now, you've probably seen images of mailboxes being locked up and carted away, And while this does look very sinister and authoritarian, it's not a particularly new thing. Don't believe me? Well, here's an article about them being removed from 2011. The iconic blue mailboxes have been gradually decreasing in quantity over the years, as fewer and fewer people send letters, with much less frequency. They're generally being carted off following a pretty straightforward procedure. Boxes getting used stay, boxes not getting used don't. In a somewhat similar vein here is the alleged removal of mail sorting machines, which, among other things, help sort mail-in ballots. Various reports have surfaced in recent weeks of post offices decommissioning these machines, but the reasoning here has been less than consistent. Some sources assert that these machines were taken down without much justification at DeJoy's questionable orders, while others say that this is just normal procedure and nothing nefarious at all. DeJoy, for his part, has appeared fairly responsive to people's worries here, issuing a statement on Tuesday promising that no changes to the USPS, from the number of sorting machines and mailboxes to the hours that post offices are open, will change until the year is over, as to avoid any possible appearance of election manipulation. But it's not DeJoy messing with mailboxes that experts are afraid will hinder the election. It's time. At the end of last week, the Postal Service issued a warning to all but 4 states, saying that unless something is changed, they would experience significant voter disenfranchisement in November. This is the result of 2 things: poor election planning and bad USPS administration. Essentially, all states have certain deadlines for mail-in ballots to be received or postmarked by in order for them to be counted. And while those rules work relatively well in normal years, they're much more problematic in the age of COVID. This is because the drastic increase in ballots in the mail would likely cause delays, meaning even people who mail their ballots on time could end up without their votes being counted because of internal USPS delays. This brings us to part 2 of our problem: bad USPS administration. As we mentioned earlier, many of DeJoy's changes at the postal system have already caused delays this year. And while he may have promised not to make any more changes, the already instituted ones could cause significant issues to the speed at which post offices can process ballots this November. And then, of course, there's Trump. The White House does not have any direct control over the Postal Service, but he does have significant sway over their negotiations with Congress, which has allowed the president to put down his foot on the idea of an influx of funding to the USPS to help them stay afloat during the pandemic and cope in November. For a while now, the White House has been rejecting claims that Trump was holding up funding to prevent people from voting by mail. And then, in an absolutely shocking turn of events, Trump went on TV and, well, you know the drill. Here's the clip.
$3.5 billion. Billion for mail-in voting. Billion. So if you didn't have it, you wouldn't. You know how much money that is? Nobody has any idea. You know, people, $3.5 billion. They want $25 billion for the post office because the post office is going to have to go to town to get these ridiculous ballots in. You know, there's nothing wrong with getting out and voting. You get out and vote. They voted during World War I and World War II, and they should have voter ID because the Democrats scammed the system. But 2 of the items are the post office and the $3.5 billion for mail-in voting. Now, if we don't make a deal, that means they don't get the money. That means they can't have universal mail-in voting. They just can't have it.
Needless to say, President Trump trying to prevent people who can't leave their houses from voting isn't a phenomenal look. The good thing here is that chances are this is just Trump spouting his normal Trumpiness, because there's not really a ton the president can do to hinder the Postal Service. Even if Congress can't get money to the USPS, the main problem would still be timing, not funding. In essence, you probably don't have to panic about discount authoritarianism this time. But if you live in the US and you're voting by mail, you should definitely mail your ballots as early as you can, and get everyone you know to do the same. What do you think of this whole situation? Do you think this is a worrying occurrence, or is it perfectly innocent? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.